What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to episode 17 of Bound to Improve. My name is Landon Eller.
And I'm Chris Pound. And the book that we decided to read this week was Poor Charlie's Almanack
By Peter D. Kaufman. I misspoke last week. It's not an autobiography.
Oh, you didn't realize that? I didn't catch you saying that.
Yeah, it's just some of his speeches.
Yeah, 11 of them.
Yeah. So going into the implementation we got two here from the 48 Laws of Power and Outliers. I can kick us off here.
Yeah, please.
So I do have something written down. So for Outliers, I was going to go find like my genealogy, because he argues that there's a lot more that goes into success than simply like where you come from determines a portion of your success to an extent.
Yeah.
So I'm mostly German, so I looked up some of the key traits of German. They are punctual, precise, and focused on efficiency, value rules, structure, and planning, prioritize personal achievement, communicate in straightforward in a nonsense manner, and they have a strong work ethic and competitive mindset. How accurate is that? What do you say?
Very accurate.
So I agree. And then I also was trying to kind of just high level analyze, like, because your parents also play a role in like what you're exposed to, etc. So I have a bit of duality here. So my parents have kind of a diverse nature. So my mom has a lot of secondary education while my dad has very little. So I think I was able to get a mix of that practical knowledge and academic foundation. And I think that this is ultimately a benefit that I haven't realized yet, in terms of I'm able to learn from the intellectual resources my mom has, but also like the perseverance
From your father.
from my dad. So being able to combine those, I think, is really special. So so those are just some things that I found in that research. Then for my 48 Laws of Power, I was going to do some bold moves, and depends what you classify as bold moves, but I would say mine. One weekend I did service on Saturday with a group of people I've never met before. So a little bold for me in terms of getting out of my comfort zone. And then also I attended a conference that was work related and made an effort to go make a few new connections.
How'd that work out for you?
It was good. The couple people I talked to were very open to talk with me further about the career path and potential opportunities in the future. So I guess being bold worked out to the extent that I was able to make connections, and you never know.
Hey, if you're timid, it's the same thing as you're bold, right?
Say that again.
Timidness and boldness were essentially, you're not born with either one.
Yep.
So you kind of have to go out of your way in order to put yourself out there to an extent.
Yep.
Right. Mine from 48 Laws of Power was to win through actions rather than arguments. I think I've been able to do that solely from the aspect that I'm no longer really looking for an argument, right? Obviously there are things that annoy you and upset you, roommates, it is what it is. But, instead of yelling at somebody, maybe, I guess the best way to put it is if you want something done right, do it yourself, I guess. And that's pretty common law, I feel like, though.
Yeah. So sweet. So moving into the summary of this book, how it was structured was there's a couple chapters kind of going over Charlie's past. Some of his kids wrote a few pieces on him, and then most of it was about talks that he gave at various events. So like commencement speeches, graduations, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
So kicking us off here with the first chapter, and it just gives an overview of Charlie's background. So he has roots in Omaha, Nebraska. He grew up.
Well, okay. Before we start here, for those of you who do not know who Charlie Munger is, he was Warren Buffett's right-hand man, who he didn't really want the limelight that Warren had, so he kind of took a different approach to life than Warren has.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So growing up, he was an avid reader, avid learner, and believe it or not, he actually worked in Warren Buffett's grandpa's grocery store without ever running into Warren until later in his life.
He was a few years older than Warren was. So
yeah, so Graduating after high school, he went to the University of Michigan for math and physics, and then he eventually went to the Army Air Corps while simultaneously going to New Mexico, getting a degree in engineering and science. Then he went to Caltech and majoring in thermodynamics and meteorology.
Very, very funny meteorology. Just kind of random.
Yeah,
I feel like.
Yeah,
but I suppose you have to need to understand the weather patterns if you're going to be in the Air Force. Wasn't he in the Air Force?
Yeah, he was eventually promoted, I think, to like a second lieutenant.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and then sense, I suppose. Yeah, his final station was Alaska, and while he was in service, he eventually got married to his first wife.
Yeah.
From there, he applied to Harvard Law School, and despite going to all those previous colleges, he
never had a bachelor's degree.
Never had a bachelor's.
How did he get into Harvard?
His father was a lawyer who went to Harvard Law School, and they were able to pull some strings.
So would you say it was like networking before it was networking?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. Then after graduating Harvard Law School, and he was in the upper percentiles of his class.
Yep.
He moved out to Southern California to join a law firm, and this is where it starts to get a little rocky for Charlie. He got divorced, and then shortly after, his son was diagnosed. His first son out of 3 kids at this point in time had leukemia.
But they never stopped him, and he always made the point to never feel sorry for yourself.
Yeah, self-pity is very destructive. Then he eventually got married again because one of his partners set him up, and then while he was still working, he wanted to find ways to diversify his income, so he began investing in stocks, equity, and actually private companies and real estate developments.
Yeah.
And then along this line, his father eventually passed away, and he had to return home to collect his estate, and he was invited to a dinner, and
that's when he ran into Warren.
That's when he ran into Warren, and they really just clicked, like right on the spot.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And then soon after he went back, but him and Warren stayed in constant contact. He left his law firm, started an investment management firm with a partner.
Yeah.
For a short period of time, and that eventually got liquidated, and then he partnered with Warren for the rest of his career.
Yeah, I didn't realize this ahead of time, but it's very interesting to me that Charlie doesn't have a background in finance or economics, which he says is what does he say about economics majors in school?
I think we'll get into it. Okay. It's just not.
Anyway, he doesn't have one of those backgrounds, like a business background. He's a lawyer at heart. But yet he's still known as one of the greatest investors ever for a method called sit on your investing. So very funny guy too, I thought.
Yeah, very, very good humor in a subtle way. Almost.
Yeah, he can be serious and he can be funny, but he knew when to kind of turn it on and turn it off.
Yeah, but before moving on here, like his life mission was to help future generations inherit a better world. So he wasn't, like Chris said earlier, wasn't in any care for the limelight or really all the wealth
he knew what drove him or not drove him, that's not the right grammar. He knew his micro motives is the best way to put it, I think. He knew what made him tick, and that's what he stuck to. So going on to chapter 2.
Yeah, chapter 2 was remembering the children on Charlie. So here are all of his children, and he ended up having a lot because
7 or 8.
Yeah. So they all gave a little excerpt here, and my biggest takeaway here was their kids were telling multiple stories, and one of them, the main emphasis was when you borrow a man's car, you always return it with a full tank of gas, and I think that just shows.
Yeah, it's about respect and going the extra mile, right? When someone lets you borrow something, you return it better than what you received it.
Yeah.
Chapter 3, his approach to life. His philosophy for investing is kind of like a Swiss Army knife, right? He believes in having mental models with multiple different disciplines and being able to kind of rely on them. And later on here, we'll talk about the man with a hammer analogy. When we won't kind of spoil that right now, but I'll let you add whatever you'd like here.
Yeah. adding on to the mental models approach, he thought they should all be interwoven. So all the big disciplines, whether that be math or science, you should all be able to understand the big ideas of those disciplines and be able to work them together to be able to make the best decisions.
Yeah.
And I think he really put an emphasis on human psychology as being one of the biggest ones.
Huge. There was a lot of psychology in the book, and I thought that was also an interesting point.
Yeah.
Because he's got no background in psychology either.
No. And he delved pretty deep into that. Like his last 150, 200 pages were all about psychology, and he never took a psychology course.
Nope.
And I think how I was going to take it next was talk to a little bit about his portfolio strategy. He stays in his areas of competence. So he understands that he has to know what he's doing in order to invest, and when he understands it completely, then he makes big bets. So he doesn't really like the idea of diversification.
No.
He's more about understand this 1, 2, 3 investments completely and go all in on them.
Yeah, don't look for what to do. First, focus on what not to do. It's like clearing the weeds before planting your garden.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of do your background research before you start throwing capital at random investments that you don't fully understand.
Yeah, and I'll give a quick rundown on how he got to his yes investments. So first they were easy to understand. They were dominant in business that can thrive in all environments. Then he didn't really look at the financial reports in accounting. He treated all of them with skepticism. He was more looking at the management, the one-off factors, competitive advantage, trying to really find those businesses that had that moat. Then after all of that analysis, he computed intrinsic value, and the ones that finally passed all those checklists, then he ran it through a final one to see if they were.
He was constantly using his own systems, which a lot of the books that we've read so far are talking about making and building systems that you can actually use, and that you fully understand. And it's pretty evident here that he fully understands the systems that he was using, and that's what kind of made him one of the greatest investors of all time, I think.
Yeah, awesome. You ready to?
Yeah. Go into the talks.
Yeah. So chapter 4. This contains 11 talks here. So going right into it. The first talk was a speech given at the Harvard School, and he was basically talking about here. He took an interesting approach. Instead of saying like, do this, and this to be successful, he used a speech from a previous person named Johnny Carson, and talked about how to guarantee misery. Yeah,
it was basically an anti-motivational speech that was actually motivational to an extent, which was weird. It had like a weird twist on it, but like I said before, he was very humorous, and he understood how to kind of play into an audience. I felt like.
Yeah.
After reading the 11 talks that he had.
Yeah. So what were Johnny Carson's 3 things on how to guarantee misery? They were ingesting chemicals in an effort to alter mood or perception, envy, and resentment. Then Munger completely agreed with those, but he added on 4 additional ones. They were to be unreliable, to learn everything you possibly can from your own experience, go down and stay down in the battles of life, and ignore the saying, I wish I knew where I was going to die and I would never go there. Do you know what he was getting at the crux of his message there?
Not exactly.
He was trying to get you to invert your problems. Look at it backwards.
And he talks about that quite a bit, where you have to kind of re-engineer the problems. It's not always a first step process. Sometimes you have to look at it from the backside, and rework the problem from behind.
Yeah, I think the biggest one here is to be unreliable to guarantee misery.
Yeah.
Because I think it's the easiest thing that each one of us can do in our daily life.
Be reliable.
It's simply to be reliable. Show up every day and get done what is asked from you. And it doesn't matter if there's 10,000 people smarter than you. If you're more reliable and you build that trust, then they're going to facilitate a connection between you.
Yeah, absolutely. And talk to the elementary wordly wisdom.
Yeah. So here's kind of going back to what I was saying along the mental models, and people that are just able to recall information ultimately fail. You have to have he uses the term lattice work, which is just like that fence that's all interwoven. Lattice work of models in your head, and be able to jump from discipline to discipline with ease to help solve problems or analyze problems. And this is where it comes in the saying, to a man with only a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if you're a pilot, for example, and they only teach you how to solve every problem with X. So if we're in a plane, a pilot, we go through a storm, and in school they teach him how to solve a problem with X, or say to descend or ascend 15 feet. And if he solves that every time when he goes through a storm, would you want a pilot that does that, the same thing every time, using what he's been known to do?
Is that a trick question? I've never been on a plane, so.
Well, every storm is different.
True. So no. Okay, so the answer is no.
No, you're going to want to be able to adapt to all your different circumstances that you encounter.
Okay.
So that's like being in the economics or something like that. You have to be able to tie in, what am I thinking of here? Human psychology.
Yeah.
That's a big part.
Yeah, economics is the
mathematics, statistics, sciences, like all those big ideas all tie into economics.
Mm-hmm.
So if you only solve economics with economics, you're going to fail.
Well, that's why we don't solve economics with just economics.
That's not what Charlie says.
That's what I've experienced so far. I'm an economics major, just to put that out there. So,
okay. Well,
very conceptual. Economics is very conceptual between the macro and the micro level. Micro is more algebraic, and macro has been a lot more conceptual, which is interesting, I feel like. I don't know why. I guess in my eyes, I would think that it kind of be the opposite way around, but kind of taking a step back and looking at it from a different point of view, you kind of need to understand everything to an extent in order to solve.
And that's using the multiple different mental models.
Exactly.
From the different disciplines.
Yes. Good way to tie it together.
So then it kind of transitions to investing here. He does not believe in the efficient market hypothesis.
No.
He more believes in a pari-mutuel system, which is where everyone goes and bets and odds change based on what is bet. So obviously most people know that Warren Buffett grew up on Benjamin Graham's philosophy, which is find extremely underpriced companies who no one else has spotted. But that has kind of disappeared as technology increases and stuff like that. So Charlie's philosophy was more find great companies at a fair price. Because even though that you might pay a little bit more in the long run, if they're a great company, they're going to constantly still increase their profits.
And dividends.
And
he loved the dividend stock as well.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
The last thing this chapter wraps up here, or this talk I should say, is he says, what should a young person look for in his career? Don't sell anything you want to buy yourself. Don't work for anyone you don't respect and admire, and work with only people you enjoy. I thought those were a couple of good insights.
Absolutely.
Moving on to talk 3 here. It's kind of another thing of talk 2. Just
it's talking about how broken the education system is.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, we had a point in our last podcast about that, where I kind of asked Landon, is the education system failing us, or are we failing the education system? And in Charlie's eyes, the education system is broken. Because
this is what I was trying to hit on earlier. They're only teaching you a couple things. You have to be able to go outside of your normal school studies and learn all the other things that they're not teaching you
on your own. Okay.
Especially not only within your discipline, but other disciplines as well.
Yeah.
And see how they interconnect.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
No.
Add there. Mm-hmm. Talk 4 is practical thought about practical thought, and here I thought he was mostly talking about how to make decisions and solve problems.
Yeah, simplify by deciding the biggest question first. the biggest obvious question first.
Yeah. You're going right into. These are like the 5 things that Charlie uses when solving problems.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
No, that was the first one.
Yeah, simplify by deciding the big obvious question first, and then think about the problem backwards. Which I don't know where that is on the list, but surely it's somewhere, isn't it?
I think it's like
number 3. It's not enough to think problems through for.
Yeah. So the second one here is scientific reality is often revealed only by math, as if math was the language of God. Math will tell you a lot more things. Like you can solve a lot of things with math. So we went through the first 3. The last 2 are the best and most practical wisdom and elementary academic wisdom, but it has to be in a multi-disciplinary manner.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically saying be able to understand the big ideas from all disciplines. And you learn this going through school most of the time.
I hated school. Like high school, hated high school.
Yeah, like that's what he was arguing. It's like they teach you this stuff in high school, but people just don't form those mental models, and they just kind of
goes in one ear and out the other.
Yeah, memorization for the test and it's gone. Last one here is really big effects will often only come from a large combination of factors. And before moving on here, he had a story about Coca-Cola that he used these 5 notions, and it was, I thought, really cool to be able to see him walk through these 5 steps and solve that problem. So if you ever have the chance to go check out how he solved the Coca-Cola problem.
Yeah. And then talk 5 was the 50th reunion address at Harvard School. My one and only point here is take a simple, basic idea, make it very serious, take it very serious, and boom, that's it. That's all you need to do. Take it serious, take one thing serious at a time, and go hard at it. I listened to a podcast with Matthew McConaughey, and he didn't want to go to law school. He wanted to go to acting school, and all his dad said was something to the effect of, give it your all. Don't half-ass it. And I think that's important in life, is just don't half-ass the things that are important to you, right?
Yeah.
Like a relationship, like school, like sports, right? Everybody has those things in their life that they take very seriously. Take those things seriously. And sometimes you have to go above and beyond in order to get ahead in life.
I have nothing to add.
Good.
Talk 6 here is investment practices of leading charitable foundations. And I just thought he was talking about the philosophy behind some of the charitable foundations. So some were taking on some risky trades like derivatives and using a lot of leverage, and they ultimately had a lot of success for a short period of time. But Charlie was like, they're not going to be able to continue to do this. And what's going to happen is all the other charitable foundations, and I think he was talking like school endowments, are going to look at that school that was successful, and they're going to try to copy their strategies.
Yeah, he said there were investment consultants for investment consultants, and that everybody was just trying to get their 2 to 3% off the top. And he thought that that's not the way to do things, especially for a foundation.
Yeah.
I have nothing else to add to that.
And then talk 7 was philanthropy.
Yep.
Roundtable.
Yep.
And I just thought the big notion that he was trying to get across here was the concept of embezzlement. And this is a play on the word of embezzlement, and it's just a functional equivalent of embezzlement. So it's the notion that switching fund managers and associated costs with them end up making less than the average fund, and this is just simply not worth it.
Yeah, that's what I have as well.
Moving on to talk 8 here, the great financial scandal of 2003, and this talk was primarily framed around the story of quant tech. And here, I'm gonna just go into all the details and kind of lay it out.
I don't even know if you need to do that. I think the moral of the story is do what's ethical and what's best for the good for society. What they did was not ethical, and the fake story and they ultimately, at the end of the day, they paid the price for it.
Yeah. So they were using an accounting, I'm gonna call it hack or shortcut, to reduce their expenses while simultaneously buying their own shares back, which falsified their market cap increase.
Yes.
And
they were worth like $2 trillion.
Yeah, and it was a plan for an X amount of time, and they ended up getting up to $2 trillion. But after that plan was over, their earnings fell dramatically. This caused them to get audited
by the SEC,
and it turns out that they were doing this malpractice. And what I thought Charlie was getting at here is these guys aren't the real ones at fault. It was the people who created the accounting standards to let that happen. Yeah, really, it's just do everything ethically, and you have to think about those consequences of the consequences.
Yeah, who's indirectly affected by what you're doing.
Yeah. Moving on to talk 9 here, academic economics. So I thought the majority of this was, he talked about the cons of econ from an academic lens.
Yeah.
So,
but he also says econ is the best major. Or I thought I read that. Maybe that's just my closed-mindedness.
Yeah. I can go into some of the cons here. So the first one is fatal unconnectedness, and this kind of leads to a man with a hammer syndrome, often causing overweighing on what could be explicitly counted. So they fail to take in all the other underlying factors, and they only take in a couple of them in determining their models or their predictions.
Yeah, I mean,
it's tough.
People are always going to manipulate data in different sets of data points, but like I said, I think everybody does that, trying to get the results that they're looking for.
Yeah,
and that's not ethical.
Yeah, I thought another big one here too was physics envy. So physics, you're able to get explicit number as an answer.
Mm-hmm.
In economics, that's completely false. It's all, it's subjective.
Very subjective.
Very subjective.
Yeah.
So,
because every economist has a different point of view and a different outcome from the same question. If you ask two different economists the same question, they'll have very different answers, and that's because they believe in what they believe, and they feel like the other person is always wrong.
Yeah, it's tough.
Very tough. It's a lose-lose. It's always a lose-lose, like an argument.
Yeah. So, what do you think is more important, macro or micro?
Good question. Which do I feel is more important? I would say probably macro, because you're dealing with a wider spectrum of things, GDP and things like that, and life expectancy. Like for instance, the average amount of children women are having in the United States is less than 2. It's 1.8 and some change, and that's not sustainable in the long run. I think everybody knows that when you have 1 + 1 = 1, that doesn't work out. And so, like Elon Musk said, people should start having children again.
So I got another question for you based on that then. Yeah. So how can you understand medicine if you don't understand anatomy and chemistry?
I will leave that one up to Robert Kennedy Jr. I think we're in good.
It was a tie directly into your micro question.
Say that one more time.
How can you understand medicine if you don't understand anatomy and chemistry?
You look at the historical data that you've been given. That's what a majority of econ is looking at the historical averages.
Do you get what I was?
Yes, I do. Because we're not using multiple disciplines. We're not using the medical data from other things.
Sort of.
Yeah.
So you have a whole bunch of different environments. And
yeah,
your
absolutely.
Micro, which ultimately funnel up to the macro view.
For example, like I said, in the United States, people are averaging 1.8 kids. But you look at sub-Saharan Africa, and they're at 7.8 kids, right? But the life expectancy in Africa is like 50. Here it's 75 or something in that range. And that's why I think macro is more important than micro, because micro, you're only focused on kind of the the nucleus, right, rather than the whole atom.
And that's exactly what Charlie says is wrong.
Really?
Because you have to understand the human anatomy and the chemistry behind the things you're using in order to use medicine effectively.
Yeah.
So that anatomy and chemistry is like your micro. And if you don't understand them, how are you going to apply them to medicine?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So that was what I was trying to convey there.
Yeah. Talk 10?
Yeah. So this talk was the USC Gold School of Law commencement address. And I think this was just general life advice that he was giving here. So my biggest takeaways were acquisition of wisdom is a moral duty. Just as a civilization can progress only when it invents the method of invention, you can only progress when you understand the method of learning.
Yeah, don't have an opinion until you can argue the opposing side better than its own.
Yeah, I had that down too. I thought that was good. And here he really emphasized do not fall into self-pity or being subject to perverse incentives associations. So that just means when you're incentivized to do the wrong thing and that incentive keeps growing and growing, you have to avoid those situations because ultimately you'll fall into that trap, which is a tendency in one of his main ones of psychology that he lists out, that we'll get to here. And a few other points before moving on here is max non-egality. So he mentioned John Wooden, which was one of the best basketball coaches of all time. He straight up told the last 5 people on his basketball roster you were practice players. So what happened to those first 7?
Probably didn't get any better.
They still practiced together, but these first 7 got all of the game reps.
Oh, so they did get better.
Yeah, so that goes back to that outliers thing, and it just compounds. So
yeah, they weren't given the same opportunities.
Yes, but I think he was really emphasizing like those first 7, like since they gotten all those reps, multiple times over, got coaching, etc., then they were able to play better together and win.
Yeah. So
instead of playing a 12, 14-man roster, he was able to play 7 and really develop those 7.
Yeah. But he had no bench. So. He had no depth. Anyway, top 11, the psychology of human misjudgment.
So here he lists 25 of his tendencies based on psychology that he learned himself. And most of these, he argued, like, they're not even in psychology textbooks. So he had to develop these on his own. Yeah,
like the Lollapalooza tendency.
Well, then let's just move right into the implementations. I would check out those others that we did not mention, in terms of if you're able to have that framework in your mind and be able to run through that checklist, in terms of all the events, whether that's school, work, personal life, and be able to identify those tendencies, then I think it'll help you understand why people have certain motivations.
Yeah, an important point here, before I even read this book, I was told from a professor that I look up to that I was getting ready to read the book, and he said that it's not one of those books that you read cover to cover right away. It's kind of like the Bible where you just open it up and you just start reading it. And I think that applies here pretty well.
Yeah, and I would actually read that section first because he sprinkles in a lot of these tendencies throughout the book. So having a fundamental understanding will help dramatically.
Absolutely.
So going into implementations here, mine was actually to try to pick 5 events that occur in this next week and try to associate them with a tendency to start building that muscle of using that checklist.
Mine is to be overly reliable. Like he said in the very first talk about the
I guarantee misery.
Yeah, I would like to say that I'm already reliable, but I always feel like there's always room to improve.
So let's quantify this.
Yeah.
How would you best go about quantifying this?
whenever someone asks me to do something, do it right away rather than maybe putting it on the back burner first. Is kind of my.
So you're gonna get 2 actions this next week.
2 actions.
So people are gonna ask you to do 2 things.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, you're gonna put those. You're gonna be over reliable for those 2 actions.
Make myself expendable. Yeah.
For 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure, I'll try.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. And moving into the favorite quotes now. I'm gonna go and open up a page in the book and just read straight from it. So there was a Q&A with Charlie, and the question was, what overall life advice do you have for young people? He answered, spend each day trying to be a little wiser than you were when you woke up. Discharge your duties faithfully and well. Step by step, you get ahead, but not necessarily in fast spurts. But you build discipline by preparing for fast spurts. Slug it out 1 inch at a time, day by day. And at the end of the day, if you live long enough, like most people, you will get out of life what you deserve. Life in its various passages can be hard, brutally hard. The 3 things I have found helpful in coping with these challenges are have low expectations, have a sense of humor, and surround yourself with the love of family and friends. Above all, live with change and adapt to it. If the world didn't change, I still have a 12 handicap. And there, I think that just speaks to exactly who Charlie is. You see his philosophical wisdom as well as his witty humor, and I just think that's a great quote to end on.
Yeah, for me, Charlie Munger's guide to having a successful life. Don't do cocaine, don't race trains, and avoid AIDS. So I think that pretty much sums up Poorly Charlie's Almanack.
Awesome. Yeah, next week's book is The Big Short, Inside the Doomsday Machine by Michael Lewis. So going to be reading about the great financial crisis and the crisis on subprime mortgages. So Stay tuned for that.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. We are bound to improve on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
We'll see you next week. Thank you.